Bismillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, I'm going to have a discussion on this topic, which is one of the questions that came up. People often ask, how can I be a student of knowledge? What books do I study? What's a curriculum that I can, and a methodology that I can take to become a student of knowledge? So first of all, Islamic University of Madinah, when I was there, I studied in the faculty of Sharia, and the books, the syllabus that we studied, the books that we studied, I'm going to take you through them, and inshallah, as we're in the library, if it's possible, I'm going to show you some of them. So look, this is the main book that we studied in Fiqh. And you see, look, it's been used. This book is Bidayatul Mujtahid from Ibn Rushd, and it is comparative fiqh. So this is Bidayatul Mujtahid by Ibn Rushd, and it's comparative fiqh. And we studied this over the space of 4 years. Every year, I think it was 4 sessions a week. And in it, he compares the different madhhab on specific rulings and speaks about the reasons for differences of opinion. That was in fiqh. And because it's Sharia, you have to study fiqh. The other subject that you have to study for 4 years is Usul al-Fiqh. And in Usul al-Fiqh, the book that we covered and the book that we studied primarily is called Rawdatul Nadhir. This is a book in Usul al-Fiqh, Rawdatul Nadhir, and it's by Ibn Qudama. And this is in Usul al-Fiqh. One of the amazing things is that Sheikh Mohammad Shanqiti, he used to be a teacher at the Jamia, and he made this mudhakkira in Usul al-Fiqh, which is a summary of Rawdatul Nadhir. These are the two main books, or the two main subjects that you study in Kulliyat al-Sharia, but at the same time you also studied Tawheed. The books that we studied was a Fath al-Majid, the explanation of Kitab al-Tawheed, as well as Ma'arij al-Qubul, which is by Hafidh al-Hakami, and that was in Tawheed generally speaking, as well as Masail al-Iman. Kitab al-Iman for Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, that's another book that we covered, and Kitab al-Ulu by Imam Dhahabi. So as you can see, these are books by classical scholars on the issues of Tawheed and Aqidah. So these are 3 subjects. Then you have Mustalah Hadith, which was once a week, and the syllabus for that, inshallah, was a book of Mustalah Hadith, but that's what I'm going to stop on just for now. That gives you a nubdha, or a introduction to the subjects that we studied, the curriculum, the main subjects, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, and aqidah and tawheed. There was tarikh, history, seerah, mustalah hadith, and other subjects. These are the main subjects. Let me pass it over to Ustadh Saeed, who's...
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. With regards to Jami'at al-Imam, which was the university that I went to, Jami'at al-Imam, which is based in Riyadh, I studied in Kulliyat al-Sharia. So when you hear of Kulliyat al-Sharia, or when you hear of Kulliyat al-Hadith, they are different faculties. So when you hear مثلا Jami'at al-Imam or Jami'at al-Islamiyya, they've got different faculties. So Kulliyat al-Hadith, the emphasis is put on Hadith. Kulliyat al-Sharia, the emphasis is put into fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and foundations of fiqh, and maxims of fiqh, يعني قواعد الفقهية. So that is the takhasus, or the specialty. However, there are other subjects that are also studied in the kulliyah. طيب. With regards to Kulliyat al-Sharia and Jami'at al-Imam, the book that they study is this book, which is called Hashiyat Rawd al-Muqbi' Sharh Zad al-Mustaqni', which is a kitab in the fiqh of the Hanabila, in the kitab above, or with regards to Zad al-Mustaqni'. So Zad al-Mustaqni' is like a mutton. There's an explanation of it called Rawd al-Muqbi', and then there are ta'liqat or commentary. So we had the Hashiyat ibn Ghasim rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'ah. So this is the book that was studied in the kulliyah when it comes to fiqh, and it's about 8 volumes. So you take about, because there are 8 levels, you would take almost 1 volume every semester, and then you would go right from Kitab al-Tahara right up until the end, Kitab al-Qasas and Shahadat and so on. And so you would study each part or each chapter, each book from the various levels that you would go, from level 1 to level 8. So that's with regards to al-fiqh. And it was roughly about 5 hours you would study. Every week you would study 5 hours of fiqh in this book. Now, I'd just like to point to the difference between the book that Sheikh Abdul Wahid and the book that they study in Kulit al-Sharia and Jami'at al-Islamiyya, which is Bidayat al-Mujtahid Ibn Rushd, rahmatullahi alayhi. That is more of a comparison fiqh, more fiqh muqaran, where he mentions different madhahib. Although Ibn Rushd was Maliki, his madhhab, lakin it's more of a comparative fiqh. Whereas Rawd al-Muqbi', Hashiyat Rawd al-Muqbi', which we studied in Jami'at al-Imam, it's specifically on the fiqh of the Hanabila, the fiqh of the Hanabila. As for Usul al-Fiqh, we studied that for about, or they studied that in the Kulliyah for 4 hours a week. طيب. And the kitab that was studied was the kitab that Abdul Wahid showed you, Sheikh Abdul Wahid showed you, which was Rawdat al-Nadir, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala. So it's a book in about 3 volumes. And again, you would study different parts throughout the 8 levels. So for example, in the beginning, you would study the ta'arifat, the definitions, or the definition of Usul al-Fiqh, an introduction to Usul al-Fiqh, when it was introduced, why was it introduced, and so on. And then the second level, and then different masail to do with the Quran, is there majaz and so on. And that would be studied when you're studying the Quran, which is level 2. And then level 3, you'd move on to Sunnah. And then level 4, you would move on to Ijma' and different types of Adillah. And then level 5, level 6, you talk about Qiyas and Qawad and so on. So that's with regards to Al-Qawa'id, Usul al-Fiqh. Then we had a subject which is called Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya. And that it was about 2 hours a week for certain levels. It wasn't every level, like it was certain level. Now, these Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, they kind of bring together all of the different masail, issues that you would study in fiqh, the 5 hours that you would be studying in fiqh. So they would all kind of support one another. Fiqh, Usul al-Fiqh, and Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya. So you've got the Usul al-Fiqh, which is like the base of the house. And then you've got fiqh, which is like the doors and the walls and the windows and so on. And then you've got Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, which is like a canopy, which combines and helps to tie up all of that which you have learnt into different principles. So that is with regards to fiqh and Usul al-Fiqh. And obviously the main focus in Kulliyat al-Sharia is on that. طيب. Then there are other subjects such as Hadith. Hadith, we studied Hadith al-Ahkam. And we studied from Bulugh al-Maram, or they studied from Bulugh al-Maram. Then there's tafsir the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like you wouldn't study the whole of the tafsir, you would study ayatul ahkam, the verses in which you can derive rulings from. So مثلا, you wouldn't talk about the qissa of Yusuf radiyallahu alayhi salam. Like you would talk about all of the ayat in talaq, for example, talking about talaq and mirath and so on, inheritance and so on. طيب, so that's with regards to tafsir. Then Aqidah, in Jami'at al-Imam, they study Aqidah al-Tahawiyah and the explanation of Ibn al-Izz al-Hanafi. And then there are other subjects such as Nahu and Tarbiyah and so on. So that kind of varied on the teacher and whatever he felt was necessary. So that's kind of like a rough outline on the curriculum of Jami'at al-Imam.
Alhamdulillah, for us, at Hadith, what we didn't do Bulugh. I know in Kulliyat al-Hadith they were doing Subul al-Salam, and they were doing Nail al-Awtar, and they were doing some of, which is by Shawkani, and they were doing al-Muharrar. But for us, for Hadith, what we did, we had Kutub al-Sitta, and we'd start off with, for example, Sahih Bukhari, and then we'd take chapters from Sahih or Kutub. So for example, Kitab al-Iman, Book of Iman from Sahih Bukhari, for example. And then that was the first term. The second term, we'd study, for example, from Sunan, from Sahih Muslim, and we'd take the chapter on other chapters, for example, Kitab al-Salat, Kitab al-Tahara. And then we'd go to Sunan Abu Dawud, for example, and then the Tirmidhi. So we'd do the Kutub al-Sitta, but books from each of them, so that you ended up making a jam. So at the end of the 4 years, we would have studied
all of these Ummahat al-Sitta,
all of the Ummahat al-Sitta, the 6 books of Hadith, but different chapters, and together it becomes like one book.
Excellent.
The other interesting thing that you mentioned with regards to tafsir as well. Tafsir, we had it was tafsir of Ibn Kathir we had, and Fath al-Bari,
Fath al-Qadir Shawkani.
And like you said, we'd cover Ayat al-Ahkam as well, because that's what was relative to
fiqh,
and Sharia and stuff like that. So alhamdulillah,
yeah, mashallah.
Really really beneficial. And then obviously there's Nahu.
Yeah, there's Nahw.
There's
Al-Fiqh ibn Malik was the one we
Al-Fiqh ibn
studied from,
Malik is
but
what I was
obviously,
saying, yeah.
so different curriculums for depending on the teacher.
On the teacher.
Yeah.
They give mudhakkarat as well. handouts,
Mudhakkarat, yeah.
and stuff like that.
But it's interesting to know that mudhakkarat, they weren't allowed for the main subjects. Fiqh, they weren't allowed. You had to use the book. And also a lot of the times for Usul al-Fiqh as well. Although you had mudhakkarat that made it a bit easier.
On the Hanbali Madhhab, what's the main mutoon? For example, what's the tadarruj? Someone wants to study fiqh. What would you say? What's the tadarruj? Because obviously the Jamia level is a level which is not college level, for example, or which is not, high school level. As an example, when we were studying, for example, without is fiqh al-muqarrar, like you said, but in the evenings we study fiqh on the matter, for example, in the masjid.
Yeah, in the masjid. Yeah.
So we can get the mutoon, like the mutoon. What's the tadarruj in the Hanbali madhhab?
Well, the tadarruj in the Hanbali madhhab is a good point you mentioned, because the book that you would study in the university is Rawd al-Muqbi', so it's thick. And so it's 8 volumes, which is exactly the same as this volume that I've got now. However, when you look into the matan, because obviously this is a nuskha, this specific print, it's mixed up with. So on the top you would have 2 books. So there's Zad al-Mustaqni and there's Rawd al-Muqbi'. So in some of the copies you've got in brackets, you've got Zad al-Mustaqni. Zad al-Mustaqni, that's in the brackets, and then you've got Rawd al-Muqbi'. So the Rawd al-Muqbi' is like literally the whole matan, like it is incorporated with Zad al-Mustaqni. Then you've got the Hashiyah. You've got the commentary of the Sheikh that's explaining it. So, kind of. Zad and then Rawd and then the Taliqat of Rawd al-Muqbi'. However, in what they would study, as you said, that's the university level. What they would study in the Ma'ahid al-Ilmiyah, the institutes, the colleges and so on, it would be Zad al-Mustaqni'. So that's literally the asas for that is now in a lot of Ma'ahid that is studied, Zad al-Mustaqni'. And the intent behind that is when a student studies Zad al-Mustaqni', they come into the Kulliyat al-Sharia, and they've already memorized or understood all of the masail that are mentioned in Zad al-Mustaqni'. Then now they're going on to the explanation of Zad al-Mustaqni', which is Rawd al-Muqbi'. So they've studied that. But then there's also a kitab called Umdat al-Fiqh in Fiqh al-Hanbali, the one that Sheikh Khalid al-Mashaykh Hafidhullah teaches from. Now that is also from the beginning levels of the fiqh of the Hanabila. So that is also very, very beneficial. However, Zad al-Mustaqni' has got more masail than Umdat al-Fiqh. So Umdat al-Fiqh Ibn Qudama, lakin Zad al-Mustaqni' has more masail. And the Hanabila, they gave more importance to Zad al-Mustaqni'. So you will find almost every sheikh has an explanation, Sauti, by way of tapes and so on. And also by authoring. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen has Sharh Mumti', which is about 15 volumes. And Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan has an explanation on it, which is about 3 volumes. And then there are a lot of other mashayikh that have other explanations on it. So Zad al-Mustaqni' is considered kind of like the jewel for, or it's kind of like considered the gem when you want to study the fiqh al-Hanabila initially from the beginning stages. So that's kind of where they would start from.
Okay, we're going to talk about, inshallah, for a student of knowledge in the UK, how he studies, what levels he does and stuff like that. But just because you mentioned an important point that we had a discussion earlier, and we were speaking about what the scholars of the classic scholars used to say about a person, if he makes itqan of 2 mutoon, then he's in a position where he's able to give fatwa.
Definitely.
What was that statement of the scholars, and what mutoon are they speaking about?
Well, the scholars, when they're talking about this specific mas'ala, they're talking about and you'll always find it in whether it's Hilyat al-Talib al-Ilm, Bakr Abu Zayd, where he talks about the etiquettes and the adornments of the student of knowledge, or Kitab al-Ilm. The scholars, when they're talking about the etiquettes of ilm, one of the things that they stress on, and they always encourage the students, is to read a certain book on more than one occasion. So it's not enough that you've read Usul al-Thalatha on one occasion. You have to read it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. مثلا القواعد الفقهية منظومة السعدي رحمة الله عليه. It's not enough that you've studied it once. If you've studied it once, you're not well grounded in it. It's almost as if you haven't studied it, because give it a year or 2, you'll have forgotten what it was and all of the masail that were mentioned in it. However, when you study this matan or this book, مثلا القواعد الفقهية, for example, you study it with your teacher, and you're going to revise it, and so for example, you study for a period of time. Then you study again, maybe with the same teacher, maybe with a different sheikh, and so on. So now you're getting used to this matan. You know all of the masail, or the majority of the masail issues that are discussed in that book, but you haven't memorized it. Like, you know exactly what issues what page and what line. Exactly. And then when you study it on the third occasion, the third time or the fourth time, now it's become like your handbook. You know exactly what mas'ala you want, and you know what page to go to, and you know any qa'idah that you want to go to. مثلا الأمور بمقاصدها, you know it's from in the beginning. Or المشقة تجلب التيسير, difficulty brings about ease, you know it's probably fairly on the 20th line or the 18th line, and so on. And if you memorize it, it's jayd, alhamdulillah. But if you don't memorize it, you still know exactly where every mas'ala is. And that goes for any book that you want to study. Any book that you want to study, you need to make sure that you repeat it and you read it on more than one occasion, minimum 3 times. And it's not mere just reading and opening it up and saying, closing it in about a week and a half. La, you actually read it and you take notes. And also it's important to use the same book, the same copy. You shouldn't go from one book and buy another explanation, another book, and so on. And also, you shouldn't busy yourself with the sharh, the explanation. That's something that a lot of students make a mistake in, whereby you, مثلا, for example, someone would say, we're going to start Manhaj As Salikeen. They would ask you, what explanation are you going to use? That is incorrect. Don't go into the explanation. Look into the matan, the wordings of the sheikh, the book itself. Study Manhaj As Salikeen. The sharh will come in time. The sharh will come in time. The second or the third or the fourth time. Once you've done that, you're able to teach that specific book. And I remember the tweet that we were talking about earlier on, Sheikh Abdul Aziz Shaykh, Hafidhullah. He mentioned in Kulliyat Sharia, students study Rawd al-Muqbi', Aqeedah al-Tahawiyya, Bulugh al-Maram. If they were to memorize these 3 or to repeat them year in, year out, they wouldn't need anything else.
There'd be a strong
student of knowledge,
senior student of knowledge.
Exactly. And the Hanbali used to say that if a person memorizes and understands Saud al-Mustaqni' and Bulugh al-Maram, he's ready to be a qadi, to give fatwa. To be a judge.
Bulugh al-Maram, why Bulugh and Zad? What's Bulugh? So people someone might know what Bulugh is.
Well, Bulugh al-Maram is a book of hadith by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahmatullahi alayhi, rahmatan wasi'ah. It contains about 1,400 plus ahadith. It contains the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you won't find the words of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He combined these books, and the similar or something similar to which is Umdat al-Ahkam. It is also a book by Abdul Qani al-Maqdisi rahmatullahi alayhi, in which he combined the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like in the ahadith that are Bukhari and Muslim, or only Bukhari, or only Muslim. So these are called ahadith al-Ahkam. These ahadith you derive rulings from. However, the difference is with مثلا the Zad al-Mustaqni' we were talking about earlier on, or Rawd al-Muqbi', it's more of a fiqh book. It is a fiqh book. So you wouldn't find ahadiths laid out as you would in Bulugh al-Maram. You would find the wordings of the وقال المؤلف رحمه الله كذا وكذا وكذا, and they'll mention a mas'ala and a mas'ala and a mas'ala one after the other. And you might not find many ahadith or verses in this. Like in every word that they say, every line is based on a verse of Allah Jalla wa Ala in the Quran, or based on the Sunnah of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or an ijma' by the Sahaba or those that came after them. So that is the difference. So
the text of Zad will be the text with the Masail, and Bulugh will be the evidences for those.
The evidence for those issues. Exactly. So when they're saying if a person memorizes Zad and Bulugh, you've got the Masail, all of the different issues, thousands, and you've got the evidence for these Masail. So you've got the best of both worlds. You've got the best. You can be a qadi, and that's how they were. A lot of the scholars of the past in the Hanabila in Najd, they memorize Bulugh al-Maram and Zad al-Mustaqni', and they would be well grounded. Like, the question is, why do students not? Why are they not on the level of those scholars? Because the students, including myself, if you can call me a student, is they don't repeat these books as often as they should.
Yeah, they study it once and
they study it once and that's it. Yeah, and they don't do muraja, and that's almost from the kaba'ir of al-ilm. Major sins of
major sins of
seeking knowledge.
That you don't do muraja.
They don't do muraja. No, that's a major sin in ilm.
Another question, and we were discussing it earlier. If you're when you're in the Mamlaka, you're studying at the Jamia, you've got the Mashaykh, you've got the Jamia's the syllabus, the curriculum which is there, planned out by the Mashaykh, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, all the books you study, all the masail that you cover, for example. Okay, so, and as you know, we study in Usul al-Fiqh, to be a faqih, you have to know the Hadith al-Ahkam, you study it in the Jami. You have to know, for example, the Hadith al-Ahkam, we study Ayat al-Ahkam, the Hadith al-Ahkam, and the masail, and what you need of the lugha, and stuff like that. Okay, now you're a student in the UK. A student in the UK wants to seek knowledge to a good level. Okay, what curriculum is the one that's going to be beneficial for him to seek knowledge, so he can attain a foundation, a ground, in a solid base to build on. He's going to attain a base, isn't he? What's your...
That's an important question. That's very important. That requires a whole lecture.
Yeah.
And it would have been better if one of the other senior serious students was to be asked this question, because the students can actually, the brothers and sisters listening, can benefit from it. But just quickly, you have to ask yourself, what is it that you want to study? This ilm is a way for you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is ibadah. So just like with your worldly affairs, you write them down and you make plans and so on, you have to do the same for al-ilm. And al-ilm is attained, there's no one specific path that you can say you have to take this route, and other than that you won't find, if you don't take that route, you won't find ilm, or you won't be blessed with knowledge. Like, it's important to know, write down the different sciences, and then you write down the books that you could study in every science. And those books have to be on a beginning level, which suits your level of knowledge. So, mathalan, for example, if you want to study Arabic and you don't know Arabic, it's extremely important that you learn Arabic. How can you learn Arabic? You can say, I'm going to study Ajurumiyya, but then you've got a problem. You know the principles, all the qawa'id, but you don't have ta'bir, you don't have words, your vocab in the Arabic language and your use of these words is at a minimum. So what do? So you've studied the Ajurumiyya, but that's from an Arabic grammar point of view. You have to also study a book that helps you with your vocabulary. Mathalan, Madinah books, or the Al-Arabiyyah Bayna Yadayk. These, they use functional languages. So, for example, they will give you a scenario when you're at the train station or you're at home. So you're learning the names of all of these items. So when you're learning them, you can also write them down and put them up, stick them up, write the singular form, the plural, and the pronouns and how to use them and so on. So you can learn Arabic via the vocabs as well. Then you'd also have to listen, because now you know these words, but you need to know how to, when you're listening, you have to listen out for the words. So you can obviously listen to, for example, go on YouTube and listen to a lecture from some of the scholars. Listen to it in Arabic. Write it down, try to see if you can understand, or the percentage of what you can understand.
Yeah, with a dictionary like Hanbali.
Exactly. And don't only listen to, also listen to Islamic Mashaykh, but also if you listen to, for example, the news in Arabic, you'll get a broader vocabulary and use of the language. So that's with regards to Arabic. The next one is Quran, which I should have started with, astaghfirullah. The Quran, it's important that the student, if he wants to memorize, if he wants to study the Quran, if he wants to be a student of knowledge, he needs to know the Quran. Memorize the Quran. If they can't memorize the Quran, they should try memorizing the Quran. And also learning the tajweed and being able to pronounce the Quran and being able to say the Quran, the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how it was revealed. And the only way that can be done is if a person goes to a teacher. A person can't pick up the Mus'haf, the Quran, and read it as it is. He can't teach himself. And that's with ilm anyway. Lakin more so the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person has to learn tajweed, has to learn how to recite and take it from the mouth of another person who knows the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then when you're talking about fiqh, you can study different books that are kind of like close to fiqh al-muqaran, where there's not a khilaf inside. There's not a lot of khilaf mentioned in it. So for example, a really good book for especially Westerners is Manhaj As Salikeen, Shaykh Saeed, Abdurrahman Saeed rahimahullah. And in general, all of the books of Shaykh Abdurrahman As-Sa'di are very, very beneficial. Shaykh Sa'di and Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahumullah ta'ala.
Let me just cut you quickly, because when we're speaking about Zad al-Mustaqna', I think one of the key things is if a student is going to study that book and he's a student in the UK, for example, that he studies the explanation of Shaykh Uthaymin because of the Usul. Earlier you were discussing, for example, how they write the books. It's easier for beginner students.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with the explanation of Ibn Uthaymin on Sharh Mumta' is 15 volumes.
Yeah, it's 15 volumes.
Now, Zad al-Mustaqna', it's thin. It's about this one. It's about the size of this.
Yeah, the book itself.
The book itself is about the size of this. It's very thin.
And this is the explanation of Shaykh Uthaymin. This is one of the volumes.
This is the explanation of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala. So it's 15 volumes, right? So Ibn Uthaymin, so this is Zad al-Mustaqna', and this is the explanation of the Shaykh. Yeah, so you will find, مثلا Ibn Uthaymin, look, this masala itself, yeah? Ghada', okay? The explanation starts from here.
How many pages?
The Shaykh explains it. Explains it.
Listen, if you don't like reading, love reading, you won't be a student of knowledge. It's not sound bites. You have to read volumes. As you can see, 15 volumes, 8 volumes.
Yeah. So we've talked maybe about 5 or 6 pages, and that's one mas'ala.
How many words?
4 words. 4 words, exactly.
4 pages.
4 or 5 pages. Yeah. So that's Ibn Uthaymin's rahmatullah explanation. Now, Sharh Mumta' might not be suitable for a student that's starting out now, okay? Because Ibn Uthaymin, it's almost fiqh muqaran, to be honest. Fiqh al-muqaran, it's comparative fiqh. It's not, he doesn't teach on one madhhab. So if a person is studying Zad al-Mustaqna', I'd recommend that they take مثلا the explanation of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan hafidhahullah. 3 volumes, kalamhu qalil, it's like, it's just a ta'liq commentary, just notes. Lakin the student will understand Zad al-Mustaqna'. Zad al-Mustaqna' itself. So that,
difficult.
Which is difficult. It's difficult to understand. It's difficult because it's like lughs, it's like riddles. And obviously the wordings, the books of the classical scholars, is their words, the words that they're using and the usloob and the way that they're writing is very difficult to understand. Whereas the contemporary scholars, Ibn Uthaymin, and they're feeding you on the plate. Basically, that's what they're doing.
Manhaj As Salikeen, I've got a copy somewhere.
That one.
Which one?
This one, Manhaj As Salikeen.
This is
the explanation of it.
And this is the actual method, actually, so they can have a look.
So this is the matan of Manhaj As Salikeen, wa tawdih al-fiqh fi ad-din. Now, this is just the matan of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin, Shaykh Abdurrahman As-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala. So literally, some of these chapters are just a few pages, or even 1 page or so. So, مثلا, for example, al-Miyah. Miyah, water is the longest, it's the longest chapter in even Kitab al-Tahar in our books. Like in Bab al-Ani, the chapter to do with vessels and so on. Few lines, just a few lines. Exactly. And Bab al-Istinja, going to the bathroom, akramakumullah, just a few lines. And then you've got obviously Zalat al-Najasa and so on. And then you go into wudu and so on. There's less issues. And it's contemporary. And it's very easy to understand. Even if your command of the Arabic language isn't great, you'll still be able to understand it. Yeah. So whether you study Manhaj As Salikeen or whether you're studying Zad al-Mustaqna', then you still have to concentrate on the matan itself. Don't busy yourself with an explanation. The wording of the matan, the wording of the Shaykh that's authored the book. Another good one is the Dur al-Bahiyya, which is Shawkani rahimahullah ta'ala, which is this book. Right? Now this is extremely beneficial and it's also similar to Manhaj As Salikeen. Even though Shawkani rahmatullah alayhi died about 300 years ago or so. Like his wordings are very easy. The wordings that he uses, And also he brings almost the most important masail of every chapter.
Yeah.
And that actually it reminds me of when we're talking about Manhaj As Salikeen and this book and so on, the beginning books, they'll talk about مثلا نواقض الوضوء, they'll talk about 5 masail or 6 masail.
Yeah.
As you move on to the next level, they'll talk about 8 different masail. Add more.
Yeah.
And then you move over to the next level, and then we'll talk about 10 and then different opinions.
As well as the same 5 from
as well as the same 5. So you're building 3 or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And that is what is called tadarruj fil ilm, where a person has to study knowledge bit by bit. Levels. It has to have levels. If a person wants to study ilm in one go, he'll leave ilm in one go. So in the UK, one of the best books that a person can study in fiqh and be well grounded in is Manhaj As Salikeen, Durr al-Bahiyya, or even Zad al-Mustaqni'. Zad al-Mustaqni'. Again, that varies on the level of the student and the madhhab that is common in their community. So if مثلا the Hanafiya, I think their book is the beginning book for them is Mukhtasar al-Quduri. Naam. So that book, for example, is ideal for them. So any of these books, as long as the person has a teacher. Naam. So that's with regards to fiqh. With regards to hadith al-ahkam, bulugh al-maram, or umdat al-ahkam, a person can study these books. So it's important to understand there are books that you study and there are books that you read. So for example, Riyadh al-Salihin is from those books that has a hadith, but it's more of a character building, social manners and so on. Like with Adab al-Mufrad. And then with Bulugh al-Maram and Manhaj As Salikeen, they're on ahkam, deriving ahkam, fiqh issues. So that's the difference between. No.
So you mentioned, for example, Quran, memorizing, Arabic language, 2 subjects. You mentioned books for that. Now you've spoken about fiqh, and you mentioned, for example, 2 books on fiqh, Manhaj As Salikeen and Durr al-Bahiyya for Imam Shawkani.
Aqidah, صح.
Now Aqidah, what would the student study? What curriculum?
Aqidah.
Bear in mind that to focus on, they have to repeat the book anyway.
They have to repeat it. Yeah, they have to. On Aqidah, for the student of knowledge, again, this is not like, obviously, this is what the scholars mention in their books. A person has to start from the simple books. From those simple books are the books of Shaykh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'a. So for example, al-Usul al-Thalatha. Al-Usul al-Thalatha, 3 introductions. There's introduction, i'lam rahimkallah, i'lam arshadakallah, 3 introductions. Then there are 3 masail. Man rabbuk, ma dinuk, wa man nabiyuk. That is, it teaches you the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. So that's a beginning level. Then you've got Qawa'id al-Arba'ah. Then you move on to Kitab al-Tawheed. Kitab al-Tawheed. So once you've studied these books, then you can go on to maybe Kashf al-Shubuhat, because you'll only be able to understand Kashf al-Shubuhat if you've studied Kitab al-Tawheed. That's what Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan hafidhahullah also encourages and says, mentions. And then other books like Nawaqid al-Islam. So these books, they're specifically, as you can see, they're on Tawheed al-Ibadah. Tawheed al-Ibadah. And Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. طيب. Then you go up a level and you study the books of Shaykh al-Islam, مثلا Ibn Taymiyyah, al-Aqid al-Wasatiyah. Now, Aqid al-Wasatiyah, obviously on the names of attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and obviously now there's Qawa'id al-Muthla, Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. So that also teaches you the names of and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah in that. Then there are other types of books which are considered manhaj books, such as Usul al-Sunnah li Imam Ahmad rahmatullahi alayhi, Sharh al-Sunnah, and these sorts of books. Now these sorts of books, they deal with the manhaj of Ahlul Sunnah in a more broader, from a more broader angle. So for example, the madhhab of Ahlul Sunnah when it comes to the hukam, the rulers, the masail to do with revolting, masail to do with the companions of Allah, the companions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, issues pertaining to the ru'ya or seen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hawd of the Messenger, different masail that happened, that there was a khilaf and difference of opinion between Ahlul Sunnah and the people of al-Bid'ah. So there are these types of books as well. Lakin, it's important that a person actually studies these books. Not just carries them and says, I studied it. You have to repeat them so often to the extent that your copy becomes ripped and the top layer, it becomes worn out because of the amount of times that you've repeated it and that you've almost memorized it.
2 things. off the back of that, which we spoke about earlier, and I think is important for everyone to focus on. The first one is a book like Usul al-Thalatha. Sometimes a person starts it and they study it, for example, 2 years and they're still studying Usul al-Thalatha. They haven't completed it once yet, for example. And also the other issue is someone might not do Usul al-Thalatha or Kitab al-Tawheed, but they're studying Sharh al-Sunnah of Barbahari, or they're studying Usul al-Sunnah of Muhammad. They haven't studied the books which speak about the basics of Tawheed, not the basics, but the fundamentals, the foundations, Ibadah, stuff like that. So these two topics maybe...
That goes back to the manhajiyya, or the methodology of seeking knowledge. So seeking knowledge has a methodology that the scholars talk about. In reality, that isn't the fault of the student. That's the fault of the teacher.
Yeah.
That is the fault of the teacher. If the teacher is spending 2 years on Usul al-Thalatha, he's doing something wrong. If he's spending 2 years on Kitab al-Tawheed, he's doing something wrong. He could have taught Usul al-Thalatha 20 times within those 2 years. That would have been more beneficial for the student. For the student to study Usul al-Thalatha 20 times in those 2 years is a lot more beneficial than him spending 2 years on that. And it is not needed. Sheikh Ibn Baz rahmatullah alayhi sometimes would complete Usul al-Thalatha between Maghrib and Isha. Because the Masail, it's very easy. Lakin if a person is studying these books in 2-3 years, there is something wrong with the teacher. It's the teacher's fault and not the student's fault. The student believes he's seeking knowledge. Every day he's going to this lesson. Lakin that is the mistake and the error of the teacher and his methodology of teaching. And that's the poor student has spent 2 years on Usul al-Thalatha and not even finishing it once. And even if they finish it once, it's not enough. They could have finished it over 10 times. So that's extremely important. The next point you mentioned about going over to Usul al-Sunnah, Sharh al-Sunnah or Usul al-Sunnah without first studying Usul al-Thalatha, that again, that's like someone wanting to run before they can walk. And walk, exactly. Before they can crawl and walk, they're wanting to run. And that's not from the methodology of the scholars. And if a student does that, they're in reality not benefiting. I know in our era, or especially in our community, if you don't, this book, Sharh al-Sunnah, is studied, but it's important. The Masail in it are important. The Masail of Aqeedah, extremely important. But when you're teaching these students, you have to make sure you teach them the Tawheed of Uluhiyyah first, and the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They start with what? Usul al-Thalatha, Qawa'id al-Arba' Kitab, and these sorts of books. And they have to make sure they repeat it many times, and then they go over to another level. And it's a shame because some people think it's a aib or it's embarrassing to study Usul al-Thalatha on more than one occasion, if they study on one occasion. That shows that that's if they finish it on one occasion. That's khata, that's wrong. They should want to study it once, twice, 3, 4 times, teach it to others, and then move on to the next book themselves. And there's another masala that the scholars talk about with this as well. When you're teaching books like Kitab al-Tawheed or al-Usul al-Thalatha, or when you're studying it, don't delve into issues that are outside of the book. So, i'lam rahimakallah, mathalan. And I remember Shaykh Salih Hussein in one of his lessons mentioning this specific point, saying that you will find a person spending 3 years on Usul al-Thalatha, and he was saying it's absolutely wrong. Why? What are they doing? Where are they getting it wrong? They're going to say مثلا اعلم رحمك الله فعل أمر كذا وكذا مبني على كذا, and the Kufiyun say this, and the Basriyun say this, and so on.
So give it all from the lugha aspect.
The lugha aspect,
exactly. Ilm is the opposite of is
exactly.
Jahl is
they don't do that, and that is incorrect.
And every science on that one.
On that, exactly, and that's what the Shaykh was warning against. So if you're teaching Aqeedah, make sure you're giving about 90% or 95% of your attention to actually studying Aqeedah, the topic of the book. As for digressing, going on to istidraj and other masail, then that is wrong. Because you're busy in this student with that which he doesn't need at that particular time. And you're confusing him, of course. Exactly. You can do exactly. So for beginner student knowledge, exactly, the beginner student knowledge. So the beginner should start with these books, but study the matan, the wordings of the Shaykh. And also, even in fiqh, for example, if there's a difference of opinion don't refute the matin, the author. Don't refute him.
Yeah.
Just say that's his opinion and explain his opinion first and his evidence, rather than refuting it. So
that teaches another. I think that's another important topic to touch upon, which is the adab and the etiquettes of a student. So we spoke about a curriculum. You mentioned books. Spoke about a methodology to some extent, the importance of understanding just the method and then repeating it and getting solid in that method, for example, and the books and levels. So we spoke about methodology. Just before we move on to like adab and take Q&A, if there's any Q&A, inshallah, there's another issue which is, I think, time. I not having istijal when it comes to seeking knowledge, not thinking that you can get all of knowledge in one time. It's a process and
taking it one time. Yeah,
it takes one time. What's the statement? They say,
well, there's a qaida fiqhiyya and it says, "Man ista'jala shay'an qabla awanihi, uqiba bihirmanihi." Whoever rushes a certain thing, rushes to reap the fruits of a certain act before its correct time, he's punished with being deprived from that specific thing. So, مثلا, in this example, if a person wants to study, مثلا, Usul al-Thalatha, for example. So Usul al-Thalatha, if this person, it's the first time he's studied Usul al-Thalatha, he's never studied Usul al-Thalatha, he wants to study Aqidah, he studies Usul al-Thalatha. Lakin, if he sits down and says, I'm going to write, this Shaykh has explained this book in 10 lessons, I'm going to finish them tonight before 2 a.m. Before Fajr, I'm going to study and complete the whole book. He can start the book, but by come Fajr time, he won't understand anything in that book. لأن he's trying to take al-ilm in one go. He tries to take al-ilm in one go. Lakin if he studies every mas'ala at its given time, that's the best way for a person to attain knowledge. So when you seek knowledge, take notes, for example. So for example, you've got a notebook, you take notes. Keep that same notebook with you. The next time you're studying the book, you'll add other things. So take every mas'ala as it is. And it shows, for example, in the kulliyah, for example, you won't study Rawd al-Muqbi', 8 volumes in one level. You'll study this in one level, and every level is about 4 months, 12 weeks or so. So you're studying maybe 10 pages a week, or maybe 15 pages a week. Then you go home, you revise that, you memorize that, you study, and then there are halfway marks and so on. Remind me on test. There's an extremely important thing to do with test. Naam. So if a person does that and he takes his time in seeking knowledge, then after a year or two, they will find that they've gained, benefited a lot, and they've gained a lot of knowledge within 2 years. Why? Because they haven't tried to digest it all at once. But they've got consistency. So it's better for you to maintain consistency than it is to try finishing one book in 1 month and then not seek knowledge for another 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then going back to it. Now, another way of attaining knowledge, which is very beneficial, which isn't implemented a lot in the US, is exams, tests. Every time you study a book or every time you study a chapter, test the students. The students should have a test on that. With this book, when they're sitting exams, there's benefits. Firstly, they're going to give it a lot more attention, regardless, ikhlas and so on, but they're going to give it more attention because they want to get the top marks. Secondly, they're forced to revise it and review it day in, day out. Also, you can get a rough understanding of how much that student has understood. So if the mark is out of 20, for example, and that student gets 2, they need to go back to the book. But if they get 20, then mashallah, they can move on to the next level. If they get to 16, 17, mashallah, they've understood a fair bit, about 70%. They can move on, but they still need to revise a fair bit, And also, when it comes to the methodology of seeking knowledge, or the scholars in the kulliyah and so on, they advise students to, for example, now, if you want to, you're starting a book, Usul al-Thalatha, or whatever book it may be. If you know that the Shaykh is going to start the muqaddimah and maybe 4 pages, read those 4 pages before you get to the class. Before you get to the masjid, read these 4 pages or 5 pages. Have an understanding of what it is that the teacher will talk about, so that when you get to class, you're not stuck in you're not in the ocean. You're not thinking.
I mean, the thing is, that's a very funny or important point. I've got a short kind of anecdote to show that the importance of that. Not many people do it. Most people don't do it. They just come to the lesson not having prepared, and hope they're going to prepare after if they're there beforehand. When it was in I think it was, I forgot when it was like 2011 or 2013, Sheikh Saud, the Sheikh that was over here, with a Dawra in Regent's Park Mosque. And because I was involved in the organisation of it, I met the Sheikh from his car. It was a Dawra on Usul al-Fiqh. And the second day, as the Sheikh got his car, he asked me a question about, but the question was, I didn't understand the question. Why didn't I understand the question?
It was the common lesson.
It was the common lesson.
Yeah, exactly.
It was the common lesson.
Yeah.
He was saying, after why, you're a serious student or you're a joker?
Exactly.
At the time I was a joker, because
I can understand beforehand. Yeah.
Beforehand, you go on how to use it. But the point is, the importance of reading beforehand.
Reading beforehand.
And the teacher testing them as well to see if they're ready for the lesson as well.
Exactly.
That was another benefit.
So Jazakallah khair, that's important. And the Sheikh obviously is nurturing you to and teaching you to read before coming to class.
Exactly.
Before coming to class. And also, مثلا, so for example, this student has got a class. مثلا, you've got a class Friday evening at 6 p.m. Review this class before the class. Review the class or the book that is going to be studied, at least 5-6 pages before going to class.
Yeah, come prepared.
Come prepared. It's like bringing your pen.
Yeah.
Like, now you're in class.
How many people don't have a pen?
Exactly, how many people don't have a pen? So now you're in class. You're going to study it with the Sheikh. How many times have you studied this book?
No, twice already.
Twice now.
Yeah.
Then when you go home, review it.
Yeah.
Review it, read it, take your notes, write it on a separate piece of book and so on. Yeah. How many times is that?
3 times already.
3 times already. That is before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson, the same day.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the week, gather your notes and read it. Doesn't have to be 2 hours sitting. 20 minutes, half an hour. These are the masail that we studied. At the end of the week. Right. How many times have you now studied it? 4 times. And if you're lucky enough to have an exam, you're going to have to review it just before the exam. How many times? 5. That book, you won't need to go back to it. You'll know exactly what masala is on what page, what issue is on what page. So you won't need to go back to it.
They always say as well at the Jamia, the time of exams, everyone's
Shuyukh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, yeah, sure, they say that, yeah, because during the exam time, you won't have time to eat. You won't have time to go to the canteen. So you're constantly,
at high level, that's it.
People crash into you when they're like this and they're walking towards the exam and they're in the masjid and they're like that. And sometimes they're walking and they crash into you, bump into you, yeah. But how can you avoid that? By starting your revision from the beginning, early. Every lesson that you take, make sure you study it at once. I think the Salaf used من رام العلم جملة ذهب عنه جملة. The one that takes Zuhri, I believe it was. The one that takes al-ilm once, in one go, loses it in one go.
And this is what plagues a lot of the students in the UK. Really.
Yeah, well, in the UK, of course, the thing.
Excuses.
Working. And that can be excuse sometimes. Like it cannot be an excuse for a duration of 5-6 years. It can't be. So that's why when in the UK we can do a lot. Alhamdulillah, there are a lot of students of knowledge. There are a lot of students from different parts of the world. There are a lot of students from Madinah University, Imam University, Hafidhahumullah. And each and every single one of them has different lessons on different sciences. Online, exactly. And then you've got also the portal, the Madinah Online, the portal. So the person just subscribes to it and they can study different books, different sciences. So there's no excuse. Lakin, what's more important than that, more important than everything is knowing how to study. Knowing how to study. And that requires a dawra or a lesson on muhadara itself, not how to study. Because I believe there's a lot of ikhlas in students and students want to seek knowledge and so on. Lakin, some may not know exactly, and I don't know genuinely, but we don't know how to study. Yeah, we don't know exactly how to study. Exactly, the best methodology. Exactly. Lakin if we know the methodology, it's just a matter of treading upon the path. Once you do so, it becomes a lot easier.
After studying Manhaj As Salikeen, and I'm assuming they mean, according to how you mentioned, studying it, repeating it, and knowing the matan.
I don't think that's what it means, though.
No, inshallah, it means that. Yeah. Let's just hustle on that they mean that. What would be the next book on fiqh that they study?
If a person studied Manhaj As Salikeen, the next step is to study Manhaj As Salikeen again. To study it again. And then after they finish on the second go, then to study it again. However, you're not going to be spending ages on it now. because now you're acquainted, you're familiar with the
masail.
Exactly, you know the masail. So you go from Kitab al-Tahara right up until the end.
Yeah.
Okay. However, in Manhaj As Salikeen, it's summarized.
Yeah.
So there are some books, I think Kitab al-Jihad, for example, isn't in Manhaj As Salikeen because it's mukhtasar.
Yeah.
Okay. Bab al-Adhan, Iqama, it's not in there as well.
Yeah.
Why? Because it is mukhtasar.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the reason why I'm saying a person should study this book, because it's ideal. And the books of Sheikh Saad al-Shitr, Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala are tremendous. Like, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him with Jannah and the highest ranks of Jannah, him and Ibn Uthaymin rahmatullah alayhima. They've made ilm easy for students. They've made the ilm easy for students. So when a person studies Manhaj As Salikeen, the next book that would be good for them to study is Zad al-Mustaghni. Now there are other books in Fiqh al-Shafi'i, for example, Matn al-Shuja', for example. There are other, but obviously that's what we study. Yeah, so I'm acquainted with that. So to study Zad al-Mustaghni. Now the Zad al-Mustaghni is a lot different to Manhaj As Salikeen in the sense that you might not find the adilla exactly how Sheikh Sa'di mentions them. Like even Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah, he writes it on the namad or on the pattern of Zad al-Mustaghni in terms of the masail and in terms of the order and so on. So now you're going on to Zad al-Mustaghni, which has more masail than Manhaj As Salikeen. So let's say, for example, there's about 1,000 masail in Manhaj As Salikeen. In Zad al-Mustaghni, there may be about 3,000 masail or 1,500 masail and so on. طيب. What you can also do is another book, which is maybe in between Manhaj As Salikeen and Zad al-Mustaghni, which is Umdatul Fiqh, Ibn Qudama. Umdatul Fiqh. Now, Umdatul Fiqh, it's in the Fiqh, Hanbali Fiqh, obviously. However, it's just summarized, it's very extremely summarized, and it's only one opinion. Lakin, it's very beneficial.
What's your view on taking notes inside the book? Because I know some students have no, other students say yes.
You have to take notes in the book. Inside the book. Okay. Yeah, you have to take notes inside the book. And when you've got the matan, for example, now, this sort of matan, which is Manhaj As Salikeen, it's already dissected and divided into masail. However, if you've got مثلا Manhaj As Salikeen, this one,
that's the explanation.
Yeah, that's the explanation. But if you look into the matan here, so if you look into this part here, that is the matan of the Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, this part. Like you find that it's not divided into masail. So what you can do is, so for example, the Sheikh says, wal aslu fi dammi alladhi yusibu al-mar'a, so on. That's a masala itself. Just write, put like a highlight on it, put a number on it or so on. Okay?
So you put the masail yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You're dissecting them. You're dissecting the matan. So you're working with the matan because that's now going to be your best friend. You're going to be your handbook. So you're going to obviously write masala here, and then 2 lines down, 3 lines down, there's another masala. Ila had, for example. Right? Highlight that as well. Like a number. Yeah, exactly. Something on or number on there or whatever. That shows you that you're breaking down the matan itself. Right? Once you break down the matan itself, make sure you use the same copy all the time and make sure you're writing these masail or you're understanding these masail as they are. And also you can take your notes here on the sides or you can write on a separate piece of paper. However, the benefit of writing it on the actual book is that this book stays with you. This book stays with you. It's your personal copy and no one will obviously, you can teach from it. If another sheikh is teaching this same book, you can go to that sheikh and you can add more notes with your previous notes. So it's important to dissect the material, the matan, to understand the matan. Like I can't reiterate how important it is to concentrate on the matan. Once you read the matan over and over.
Once you've completed Usul al-Thalatha once, shall we complete again and again before moving on? Better to move on to Qawaid al-Arba'a.
Well, I'm finished about 2-3 times. Understand the matan and the masail that are issued, and if you can summarize the book itself on a separate. Now, so once you study Usul al-Thalatha once, study it again and again. Once you study about 2 or 3 times, try summarizing the book itself. Try summarizing. Yes, it might take time. Like it doesn't have to be a 500-page essay. No. For example, اعلم رحمك الله أنه يجب علينا نتعلم أربع مسائل and so on. Just write about 4 or 5 lines on what you've benefited. You as a student, what you've benefited. Why? Because اعلم رحمك الله, they are the words of الشيخ محمد عبد الوهاب رحمة الله عليه رحمة واسعة. Write your own explanation.
So like paraphrasing it in your words.
In your words, and what you've benefited and you've understood.
And that you remember it.
Exactly. You will remember it a lot easier. It may be that you write this somewhere and it will remain with you for a long time. It may be that you come back to it and you think, oh no, this wasn't actually correct. I understood it the wrong way. But you've written it down. So summarize it. Yeah. So every book that you study, try summarizing it as you go, every chapter. Yeah. Try summarizing it. Sure. And then once you've studied it and you're well acquainted with Usul al-Thalatha, then move on to al-Qawaid al-Arba' and then move on to Kitab al-Tawheed. Yeah. And it's important that you understand the intent of the mu'allif, the mahallu shahid. Yeah. So he can bring, مثلا, the Imam can bring an ayah. طيب. مثلا والعصر الإنسان لفي خسر إلى آخر الآية. You can hold 2 lectures on that, on this surah itself. Yeah. Like, what is the point of evidence? These 4 things that he's mentioned, they're mentioned in this surah. Yeah. Point towards where the point of evidence is, the mahallu shahid. Yeah. It's very important to understand where the point of evidence is. And likewise for every other verse and every other hadith. Yeah. So just summarizing it. And
just like
Wajh al-Istidlal, how the Shaykh used this as evidence.
Yeah. What about Seerah? Seerah is a topic that I think is read.
It's read, it's not necessarily studied. And you can study it or read it and so on. But bear in mind that the scholars haven't worked on the seerah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they haven't given it as careful attention as they have to the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the ahkam of the Quran and the ahkam of fiqh مثلا. Why? Because in general, the scholars don't derive rulings from the seerah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In reality, even amongst the usuliyun and the muhaddithun, the scholars that their specialty is hadith, and those whose specialty is usul al-fiqh, they don't look at sunnah from the same angle. Yeah. They don't look at the sunnah from the same angle. The muhaddithun in the Ummahat al-Sittah and so on, they'll mention everything to do with the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he looked and his character and how he looked, his character and so on. However, the usuliyun, they'll only look at it from the aspect of his actions, his wordings, and his taqrirat, that which he agreed with. Yeah. Why? Because the usuliyun, their main concern is just deriving rules. That's what they want. So they want to derive rulings. And you can't derive rulings directly from the seerah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam because there hasn't been a khidmah for it exactly how it has been for hadith and the ahkam of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a lot of people, and I won't call them students of knowledge, but a lot of people make a mistake in that. They say, look, this is the seerah and this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And it might
have been accepted to Madinah Uni. I memorized half the Quran. How do I combine between the Quran and memorizing mutoon?
MashaAllah, hani'an lak, if you've been accepted into the Islamic University of Madinah, that's a ni'mah. That's a great blessing. That's a great benefit. That's a great blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Carry on by finishing the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, completing the memorizing of the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. And then when you get there, you can obviously start the Ma'had of al-Lugha al-Arabiyyah. Concentrate on the Ma'had of al-Lugha al-Arabiyyah. And then when you get to, inshallah, whichever kulliyah you want, concentrate on that kulliyah. Concentrate on your academic studies. Concentrate on the lessons that may take place outside of the university. However, at every stage, you have to know your level. Make sure you complete the Quran. Alhamdulillah, you're halfway there already. And then you give a lot of importance to the Arabic language. So for those 2 years, you will be learning the Arabic language as it is. Also take advantage of the lessons of the shuyukh, especially Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, who's in his, hafidhahullah ta'ala, who's in his mid-80s, towards his late 80s. Make sure you take advantage of. Don't say I don't understand Arabic and maybe just sit in his gathering, just look at him. Just look at him. Just by looking at him, there's barakah, and you will benefit bi-idhnillah. And you'll be amongst other students of knowledge. So make sure you busy yourself with seeking knowledge. Now, when you go to the Islamic University of Madinah, stay away from qila wa qala. He said, she said, stay away from all of that. Stay away from fitan. Stay away from busy yourselves with people who are refuting one another. Stay away from people who are going out to coffee shops, going out to different places and so on. Even when it comes to Umrah, go when you need to go Umrah, like, don't go every Friday, don't go every Thursday, every weekend. Although it's good, يعني, لكن طلب العلم and which is Sunnah, لكن and Umrah, which is Sunnah, when you look at the two, which is more beneficial? Seek knowledge. And the reason why I'm saying that is because a lot of students, they go every other weekend, meaning, alhamdulillah, it's trade. Like, you could be using that time to revise.
Yeah, of course.
Revise.
I mean, there's a qissa, which is one of when we traveled to Riyadh, and it was near the exam times. And we went to the place where the Mufti is and Sheikh Fawzan and stuff like that, a bunch of our students. And when we sat with Sheikh Fawzan, he's like, we came and we asked, we came to ask you a question. He goes, you traveled all the way to ask me a question. He goes, ulama in Medina, isn't it exam time? And he kind of rebuked us for not focusing on our studies.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. So you have to study. You have to focus on your study. You have to put your head down. You have to make sure that you're walking towards the kulliyah. You're coming back. You're going to the bedroom, going to your mat'am and so on. Going to the. All of this is an ibadah. Is an act of ibadah. من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علم سهل الله به طريقا الجنة. You're on a path to Jannah. So busy yourself with that which benefits you, and make sure that you give a lot of attention to the studies of the university, the curriculum of the university, as well as the lessons of the mashayikh that you feel that you can benefit from. And also, don't argue a lot, don't talk a lot. Sheikh Salih al-Usaymi hafidhahullah, he has an advice, a question was, he said, تعلموا الصمت. Learn how to be quiet. Being quiet is half al-ilm, nisf al-ilm. So being quiet. And a student of knowledge shouldn't busy himself with things that don't concern him. Things that don't concern him. If Imam Ahmad rahmatullahi alayhi, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, if Imam Ibn Sheikh al-Abbad, Sheikh al-Fawzan, Ibn Uthaymin, if they busied themselves with things that did not concern them, they wouldn't be the A'imma they are today. So now you're going out to seek knowledge. Tomorrow, inshallah, you're going to be an Imam from the A'imma of Ahlul Sunnah. You're going to be an Imam from those people that are guiding the people to the haqq. So make sure that you busy yourself and you program yourself into that. And also read a lot of books and listen to a lot of lectures on how to seek knowledge. That is a science of itself, how to seek knowledge and what to do and what not to do. And there's a very good book which is called معالم الطريق في طلب العلم, Sheikh Abdul Aziz Sadhan. And he talks about a lot of issues, how the student should act with himself, with his family, his siblings, his...
You recommend to study fiqh by studying the madhhab or by the ahadith al-ahkam, like umdat al-ahkam?
Both. If you can study, both, there's goodness in both of them, right? Yeah. However, I would recommend that a student studies al-fiqh based on a madhhab.
Yeah.
It is a ni'mah. It is a ni'mah that a person can study a madhhab, because these madhahib, they didn't come overnight. Yeah. They came through centuries by the works of Jahabid, A'imma, Ulama, Fi'lan. And every book, every madhab itself has its own books, has its own curriculum. Every madhab is a university on its own. Yeah. Right. So when you're studying these masail, this madhab, you're tatafaqah fi din. You're learning masail, a lot of masail that you necessarily wouldn't come across in Bulugh al-Maram or Umdat al-Ahkam. So if you can study, that's obviously if you can't do jam', if you can't do, like if you can, if you've only got time for one, or you've only got to teach the capability of doing one, then study it according to a madhab, like without any ta'assub, no blind following, without having ta'assub, and without building allegiance according to your love and hate according to that specific madhab. Like if a person can study a madhab, that is a ni'mah, and it depends on the madhab that is common amongst his people. Mathalan, if you're from certain parts of Africa, maybe the Maliki madhab. Exactly. So in your community, for example, maybe the Maliki community, the Maliki madhab is prominent, or maybe the Shafi'i madhab, or maybe if you're from in certain parts of the world, maybe the Hanafi madhab is more prominent. Yeah, exactly. So it's actually good to study the madhab that of which is in your country or in your community. And with regards to the madhahib, Shaykh al-Islam was asked by one of the qudat of the Hanafiya, I believe it was, who's a Shaykh himself, right? He asked Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said that people keep, degrading me because I follow the madhab. And I've been to the Shafi'i scholars and they told me to leave their madhab, or some of them told me to stay in your madhab because nothing's going to change anyway if you leave the madhab and so on. And then the Sufis, I went to the Sufis and they guided me to something else. And anyway, so the Shaykh said, right, with regards to the madhab, it's one of three. Either this mas'ala, your madhab is the rajih. The stronger opinion is with your madhab. In this case, stick to your madhab. It's the qawl rajih, aslan, in the whole mas'ala. So there's no problem in you sticking to this mas'ala. Or the second type is if there's a mas'ala, like in your madhab is the weaker opinion, marjuh jiddan. So it's the weaker opinion. In that case, simple. Leave your madhab in this mas'ala and go over to the madhab or follow the haqq, the truth. Follow the truth. Then there are masail that are ijtihadiyya, تتكافئ الأدلة, يعني the adilla are exactly equivalent both. So with these sorts of masail, make ijtihad, because you're now a mufti, she said, you're a mujtahid, so make ijtihad, and whichever you feel is closer to the haqq, then follow it. So these madhahib, I mean, the problem in the UK is a lot of people have become accustomed with degrading these madhahib and say, no, we're not studying madhab, no, like in that's very disrespectful, firstly, because these scholars, they're a'imma, kibar ulama, and they're jahabida, they're mountains of knowledge. So to belittle their madhab, that shows that person has no respect for the scholars and no respect for ilm as it is. So you can follow the madhab as long as you're not building love and hate on that, you're not blind following, and you're not saying my imam knows best. You can also study Hadith al-Ahkam, Umdat al-Ahkam, Bulugh al-Maram. In both of them, alhamdulillah, there's goodness. Like personally, I believe if a student studies the madhab of a certain alim and he becomes well acquainted with that madhab, that's a blessing, alhamdulillah, and it's quicker for him to become a faqih.
Yeah, I think, and that's really key as well, is that when you study a madhab, you study the masail and it's quicker. So you finish, you're shortening, it's like a shortcut. You're getting there quicker. Basically.
You're getting there quicker.
Okay, there's a lot of questions and we can't take them all, but what I'm going to say is, everyone's question that didn't get answered, if you're still here with us on the live, then put them in the DM, send them to us, and inshallah we'll do some recordings where we answer those questions specifically, inshallah. I want to say Jazakallah khair, Ustadh Saeed, because I pulled him just now, I don't know what time, nearly 11 o'clock. He's been here since, I don't know what time, 6 o'clock, recording, and this is another recording. This wasn't planned. But inshallah, hopefully it's been beneficial, and inshallah we can benefit from you more in the future. Barakallah. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.